You know, as our movement strives for respectability, we're joined by a man who's been a leader on Capitol Hill for almost 4 decades, 3 of them in the United States Senate. Senator Tom Harkin of Iowa is an ally of the secular movement. You name the issue, but church-state separation, stem cell research, reproductive rights, and much more. He is consistently on the side of rational public policy, standing up to the anti-science, reactionaries, fundamentalist influence in government. Perhaps most importantly, Senator Harkin scored an A on the Secular Coalition for America scorecard. Our secular movement is often compared to the LGBT movement, and I'm sure back in the 1970s and 1980s, many members of Congress would have hesitated to speak to a group fighting for gay rights. It might be seen as risky, or, they worry how it's going to be perceived. Well, like the gay rights movement, today more and more secular Americans are coming out. They realize that being open about their secularity is not only honest, but it's an effective way of opposing the religious right. They're showing that millions of good citizens out there are personally secular. But for many of us secular Americans, it is a little bit scary to come out. They'll think, well, what will family think? What will friends and neighbors and co-workers, how will it be perceived? That's just one reason why having Senator Harkin here today is so significant. He's saying, I know secular Americans are good Americans. I know they are part of my constituency. So we're grateful to Senator Harkin for fighting for rational public policy, for taking time out to talk with us, and for standing up for secular Americans. Let's have a warm welcome for Senator Tom Harkin.
Thank you very much, David, for that kind and overly generous introduction. And Edwina Rogers, your Executive Director, good to see you again. And, of course, my longtime friend, Woody Kaplan, for extending me the invitation when I met him a couple of months ago someplace, wherever it was, and for asking me to do this. I just thought of this David was saying about my early on meeting with gay rights organizations and individuals. I made a brief run for president in '91 and '92. Some of you may have missed it, but that's all right. Anyway, I was the first presidential candidate. This is really odd. I was the first presidential candidate to actually use the words "gay" and "lesbians." Wow. It was. I didn't think that much of it, but it was. Oh, you can't say that. I said, well, you have to say homosexuals. I said, well, but that doesn't capture it all. That's not quite all of it. So I was proud to be the first to use that, and now it's history. Well, anyway, thank you very much for having me here. I heard I was the last-minute substitute. Woody had hoped to get the Reverend Billy Graham here. I guess he backed out at the last minute. The image of David of Billy Graham proselytizing, trying to proselytize this crowd, reminds me of that wonderful little thing of Mark Twain. He was writing about missionaries. And he was writing about, the missionary went out among the cannibals to convert them. They listened intently, and then they ate him. Anyway, thank you for coming here to Washington to speak up for an important viewpoint. The secular viewpoint absolutely deserves an equal and respected standing in our society and in our national discourse. So I welcome to Washington all of my fellow Americans, I always do, including those who do not share my religious or philosophical beliefs. The First Amendment guarantees to each of us the right to practice the religion of our choice, or no religion at all. And let us remember, no matter how we identify ourselves, religious or secular, we are all equally respected members of the American family. We have a saying up on Capitol Hill, if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu. Well, this week in D.C., especially tomorrow when you make your Hill visits, secular Americans and the secular viewpoint will be on the table in an important way. Likewise, last year I admired your choice of picking the National Mall for your Rally for Reason, because at events on the mall we celebrate America's amazing diversity of ideas and beliefs. We also celebrate the freedom and the tolerance and the non-discrimination and the right of dissent that are enshrined in our Constitution that defines us as Americans and as a truly free society. I know I couldn't be there in person, but I appreciate the opportunity to at least make a video and be there by video at the And so I wanted to be here in person today simply to thank you for standing up for these principles in a proud and prominent way. We face a major paradox these days in the United States. Our national institutions, Congress in particular, seem to suffer from paralysis and gridlock. We saw this again just last week when the Senate failed to pass common sense gun safety legislation that's supported by well over 90% of the American people. I didn't know 90% of the American people were rationalists. But any rational person knows that this was a very sane approach. But while Congress often seems to be tied in knots and unable to move our nation forward, many times we see the American people moving ahead of this Congress in very important ways. Most recently, we saw this on the issue of marriage equality. Our institutions have moved slowly. Sometimes they've moved backward. Meanwhile, the American people, driven by rationality and an innate sense of what is just and right, have raced forward into the future. A clear and growing majority of Americans favor marriage equality. Well, what was the second state to have a constitutional right for an individual to marry his or her choice? My state of Iowa. Now, to be fair, it was a court decision. And as you know, the Iowa Supreme Court unanimously struck down the Iowa law as being unconstitutional. And as you know, the religious right then mounted a major campaign to unseat the justice. We have a really good, basically good system in Iowa for picking judges. And then after you serve a while, then it's an up or down, yes or no vote, should they be retained. In the history of Iowa having this law, I think there were only 3 judges that were never re-elected. And we looked into that. One kept showing up drunk every day in court. Not. Another one was convicted of taking bribes. I forget what the other one, but that's the only reason that people were not reconfirmed on the bench. No one had ever been kicked off the bench by the voters for a decision that was made. And there have been some controversial decisions in the past. Well, but the religious right really went after these judges in Iowa. So when 3 of them were up for retention, they all lost. Wow. They mounted that campaign. Marcia Turnus, who was the Chief Justice and a Republican appointee, was again denied the opportunity to continue to serve on the bench, and she has been on since that on a national speaking tour on marriage equality. But then, you know, these things have waves, right? So that religious right, they went after him. The last judge that was in that majority opinion was up last year, this last time. Now, what I'm talking about when they kicked him off, that was in 2010. So in 2012, another judge was up, help me with his name.
David Wiggins.
David Wiggins, that's right. David Wiggins was up. And we, I guess, not me so much, but those of my ilk, and viewpoint, world viewpoint, were telling him, okay, you've got to go out and you've got to raise a lot of money because they're going to come after you, and the justice before didn't do that, and you've got to get your version out, and you've got to go out and campaign. Wiggins said, you know, I'm not going to do it. He said, once I start taking money, or any judge starts taking money to get elected, and he made this in a speech, and it was broadcast all over Iowa. He said, how would you feel if you came into my courtroom and the attorney on the other side was representing someone, and they had given me $50,000, and you didn't give me anything? Would you really think you're going to get a fair shake in my courtroom? People begin to think, you're right. We can't have a judge system like that. And so he refused to raise money, and he refused to campaign, and he won. And he beat the religious right. So I don't know why I tell you that story, is that, you know, sometimes, yeah, we take some whacks, but I think that what our job, and what I respect you so much for, is to continue to struggle for just rational thinking, reasoning with people. Sometimes it's hard, but I think eventually people respect what you do. And it is what we need to do, and that is to be driven by rationality and an innate sense of what is right and just. So when I saw what happened in Iowa, and what I saw happen, what's happening now with marriage equality, and I think it's going to happen on the gun issue too, it's sort of changed from the bottom up. And any of you who know me know that I've often said I don't believe in the trickle-down theory, either in economics or in politics. I believe in percolate up. You get people at the grassroots, and you start moving up. So I think it's sort of our free society at its best. I see much the same thing happening. So there's a common thread here. I see much the same thing happening with regard to those who have a non-theistic view, worldview out there. You two are winning broad acceptance and respect. You're earning a place at the table. Now, Vice President Joe Biden is often given a lot of credit for taking White House charge of marriage equality. But I will give President Obama enormous credit for leading the charge in recognizing and validating the secular viewpoint. In his inaugural address in January, he said, and I quote, "Our patchwork heritage is a strength, not a weakness. We are a nation of Christians and Muslims, Jews and Hindus, and non-believers." And President Obama did again in February at the National Prayer Breakfast. Think about this. At Washington's premier annual occasions for very public piety, the National Prayer Breakfast, the President went out of his way to speak inclusively and respectfully about non-believers and humanists. And I say good for him. But I want to take issue with the President's choice of words. I do not agree with calling secular people non-believers. I have lots of friends who hold on to secular viewpoint, and they are passionate believers. Passionate believers in the First Amendment. They believe in justice. They believe in living moral and ethical lives. They believe in tolerance and non-discrimination. So please, don't refer to yourselves as non-believers. And don't refer to secular. So let me conclude with this thought. We all remember Dr. Martin Luther King's wonderful words, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." I would add, however, it doesn't bend all by itself. It requires individuals who are willing to speak up and speak out. It requires affirmative acts of conscience and courage by those who have been excluded and discriminated against. And that's what you folks are doing this week by coming to Washington, visiting your congressional offices. More broadly, that's what the Secular Coalition for America is doing 365 days a year. You have made enormous strides towards full inclusion, respect, and equal treatment. And know that those of you here, who are here in this room and are going up on the Hill, just know there are millions of people that you are speaking for in this country. You are not alone in this effort. And maybe sometimes, well, you know, it took a long time for gay and lesbian people to come out of the closet. Even today, I don't know why, but sometimes it's tough for people, but all that discrimination. But now, more and more, people are finding that, hey, this is all right. I mean, when I get a card, actually I got a Christmas card from a fellow member of the Congress, and in it was the picture of them at their son's wedding, marrying another man.
Wow.
I mean, that's some pretty good steps forward, folks. So, I mean, I just want you to know, there are a lot of people out there you represent. They may not be out of the, quote, closet yet, but they believe that in this country, a secular belief, a belief in reason and rationality, is something that innately they adhere to. Even people sometimes who have religious beliefs can temper that with a secular viewpoint. I don't know, and I've never thought that maybe both are, that the two are absolutely, totally mutually exclusive. Well, I mean, I suppose you could be so far over one way or the other way, I don't know about that, but it seems to me that people can, as I said, can have a religious viewpoint, that's fine, just as long as they don't use that to enshrine in our laws or in our laws, in our structures in society, to discriminate against those who don't believe the way they do.
Or to get
So
preference.
I guess that's my major message to you, is that you are here representing millions of other Americans. And quite frankly, I take pride in that fact. I take pride in the fact that secular America is now being more included, more respected, and receiving equal treatment. And quite frankly, I believe that is something that every American can take pride in. Thanks for having me here.